Distilleries are watering down your whiskey, and it's time to set the record straight. Welcome back, Dram Fam, to the Whisky Diary. So, I had a couple of weeks off. I didn't post a video for the last couple of weeks because I was actually over in Sweden hanging out with the guys from the Mackmyra distillery. I have to say that was an absolutely incredible experience, and thank you so much to them for being so incredibly patient with me. I had some absolute life-changing experiences while I was there, so thank you very much to those guys. I've got about 3 hours worth of footage to go through and cut down into a video, so might take me a little while, so bear with me on that, but that is coming. But anyway, on to today's subject. So I'm going to preface this with a quick one. We are talking about ABV, not proof, for those in the US. So when I say 40% ABV, we are talking about 80% proof. You can pretty much just get the proof by doubling the ABV. But anyway, this week we are talking about Cask Strength Whisky. Now, before we can really talk about cask strength whisky, we have to understand a little bit about the maturation of whisky. So, still will produce a liquid that's anything from 60 to 95% plus alcohol. Like, that's pure alcohol. So by the time you've made your cuts, like your heads and your tails, and you've got your hearts, that's the bit that you actually want to put into a cask and mature, you're looking about 70% pure alcohol. Now, that is the real good stuff, and that is almost ready to go into a cask. Now, the strength that the liquid actually goes into the cask is referred to as its filling strength. Now, many distilleries have different takes on this. It's part of a distillery's fingerprint. Generally, as a rule, it seems to be standard that most distilleries fill their casks with 63.5% alcohol. This can vary from distillery to distillery. Look at Glenfiddich and Balvenie. They also fill casks with 68.5%. And then you've got distilleries like Torrevig, which have filled casks with liquid as low as 58%. Now, you may think it's a bit counterintuitive to work hard to distill ethanol off only to add water back to it and then fundamentally just aging water, and there are reasons I'm not going to go into too much right now. That's a whole separate subject which I could address in another video in and of itself. If that's something you're interested in, get subscribed and let me know in a comment down below. But fundamentally, the scientific reason is you have to knock it down a bit to maximise the flavour extraction from the cask. As I say, some distilleries, part of their fingerprint is to have a higher filling strength, and that will produce slightly different results, but generally it is kind of understood that 63.5 is where you're going to maximise the extraction of the flavour compounds in the cask itself. While that cask sits there aging, it's breathing. That liquid is being soaked into the wood and squeezed back out again. There's a whole number of chemical reactions going on and a number of compounds from the wood slowly dissolving into both the water and the alcohol in that cask. Over time, some of that liquid will be lost, mainly due to evaporation. It's what we call the angel's share. If you've ever walked into a whisky maturation warehouse, you can smell it in the air. You can smell that kind of damp alcohol smell. It's quite magical, to be quite honest with you. Now, the rate at which that liquid is lost is dependent on a huge number of factors, including the climate, so like the humidity inside the warehouse, what the floor of the warehouse is made of, the cask size, the wood type, the degree of charring, and what that barrel may have had, what that cask may have had in it before. But on average, we generally kind of accept that we lose about 1 to 2% of the cask volume per year. That translates to a drop of about 0.5% ABV per year. But again, this varies hugely from one cask to another, from one warehouse to another, where you are in Scotland or where you are in the world. An interesting fact, in Kentucky, the alcohol tends to leach out of the cask less than the actual water does. So in many instances, you can mature a cask and find that it is a higher ABV than when the liquid went in. Now, the volume of the cask will reduce, but it's because the water is leaching out of that cask before the alcohol. There is more alcohol than water left in the cask. On average, a 12-year cask you may find has lost about anything from a fifth to a quarter of its volume over its 12-year maturation period. Now, a fun fact is in Scotland, that equates to about 22 million gallons of liquid per year being lost to evaporation, as I say, to the angel's share. Well, what that fundamentally boils down to is when that cask is emptied and ready to go for bottling, you're looking at the volume, the liquid in that cask being at anywhere from 55 to 58%, assuming a 63.5% filling strength. Now, as we know, the Scotch Whisky Association have state that a whisky, to be called a Scotch whisky, it must be bottled at no lower than 40% ABV. But for the most part, when that cask is pulled, we're looking at somewhere in the mid to high 50s. Now, for the most part, that is the job of the master blender. They will be responsible for tasting the casks and understanding when it is ready to be pulled from the warehouse and emptied. That cask will then get vatted with a whole bunch of other casks that may be casks of the same type or other casks in order to blend them together to get the most consistent balanced flavour for the particular whisky they're trying to produce. Now, this does not make it a blended whisky. We are talking about single malt Scotch whisky in this particular instance, because it's still the same whisky and it's still from the same distillery, but it gets vatted together in order to kind of produce a more consistent product, so that the same whisky that you're drinking year after year after year tastes the same, because fundamentally, whisky is a batch-produced product. You are going to have variations from month to month, from cask to cask, from year to year. Now, once that master blender has decided that that particular batch is a consistent flavour and is ready to go for bottling, it will get watered down to its bottling strength. In most instances, that will be somewhere between 40 and 46% ABV. So, when we say that a whisky is cask strength, we are just saying that it has not been watered down to a target ABV, and it is simply bottled at whatever ABV it came out of the cask. So, why add water to whisky? It may be that that is the product that people are used to. That's what you've been selling for years. That's what people have come to expect. It may be that the flavour is just too strong. I'm sure many of you remember drinking whiskey neat for the first time and that initial reaction, that recoil, because quite honestly, drinking something that's 40% ethanol is quite a full-on experience, let alone drinking up at 50 and 60%. Many people claim that adding a drop of water and watering it down from its cask strength can help marry the flavours, especially during vatting. I'm sure many of you have noticed that the flavour of your whisky changes slightly when you add some water. It can soften a whisky that may be particularly bitter. It can also bring out some sweetness. That is personal preference, but when it comes to buying a bottle of whisky, that's the decision of the master blender. Some distilleries still do bottle down at the minimum 40%, but more and more now we're starting to see distilleries offering their products at slightly higher ABVs, such as 43 and 46. In fact, 46 now, I'd argue, is becoming a lot more common. And lastly, affordability. Bottling whiskey down at 40% instead of up at 60% means that they can produce more bottles and sell them at a lower price, so you're not forced to pay the highest possible price a bottle may come to just because it's got more ethanol in it. So that kind of begs the question, why would you drink cask strength whiskey anyway? Well, for me personally, it's about the flavour and the experience. Alcohol is, in many cases, the flavour carrier. For me, drinking that higher ABV liquid has got a far more exciting experience when that alcohol hits your tongue and almost like it pops with the flavour as it evaporates, and as that volatile ethanol starts to evaporate and react in your mouth, loads more of those flavours are released. It's just generally a bigger, more full-on experience. Now, many of you will have noticed that when you add a drop of water, which is something I highly recommend you do with a whisky whenever you try, is just add a little bit to see what happens. In some instances, it can bring out bitter, almost like more drying notes. In other instances, it can bring out more sweetness, more sugariness, and like a more floral note. Every whiskey is completely different. Now, you can add water to a whiskey, but you cannot take it away. For me, I like that idea of being given the product in its rawest form, and let me decide how much water I want to add to it. Let me choose how I want to drink my whiskey. That's not to say that buying a bottle off the shelf down at 40, 46, whatever percent is bad. It's just someone's made that decision for you, and that might be exactly how you like it. Me personally, as I've grown on my whiskey journey, I'm getting more excited about trying whiskies where that decision hasn't been made, and that's up to me. And it is also just really exciting to try a whiskey that you know well in just a slightly different variant to see what it has to offer. A great example of that is the Bunnahabhain 12. Now, I've been a huge fan of Bunnahabhain 12 for years, just the regular, I mean, this is bottled at 46.3, which is a pretty generous bottling strength anyway. But they recently released the 12 Cask Strength. So this is bottled up at 55.1. I should definitely shoot a video actually doing a side-by-side comparison of these two. I've actually barely got anything left in this, so I should probably pick up another one. But it is very, very interesting to explore a whiskey that I know so well in a setting that I don't. So where do you find cask strength whiskies? Well, in the example of the Bunnahabhain, the distillery will often produce maybe short limited edition releases. In the case of Glenfarclas, you've got the 105. That is a staple cask strength version of their whiskey in their core range. Some great examples. The Glendronach Cask Strength. I'm a huge Glendronach fan, you will know I love the 15. This is absolutely exceptional, and it is not that wildly priced. Another example of these batch runs, we have the Glenallachie 10-year-old Cask Strength Batch 4. Now, these, for instance, are bottled up at 56.1 and 58.6. So we can see here already we are seeing differences in ABV. Another fantastic place to find cask strength whiskies is with independent bottlers. Here we have a Tullibardine 7-year-old. This is bottled up at 56%. This is absolutely fantastic. Now, I like Tullibardine whiskey, but I sometimes find that they're just a little bit too mild, a little bit too soft for my liking. Tried this the other day and immediately went and bought myself a bottle. This for me is what Tullibardine really could be. I'd like to see just a little bit more of like an aggressive, full-on flavour from it. But you know, that's not to everyone's palate. But this is definitely way more to my palate. Many of you will know the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Now, all of their whiskies are bottled at cask strength. This one here, I believe this is a Glentockers. This is bottled at 66.3% and this is 9 years old. This has got absolutely tons of flavour. I nearly always water this one down to probably about 50% ABV because there is just so much to give. But this is an example of where you're getting things. But I mean, like I say, I'd love to know what this went in the cask as, because this is coming up at 66.3 once it's bottled. As I said, majority of whiskies are actually vatted together in order to produce a more consistent product. But sometimes you will find a single cask, and that literally means that all of that liquid has gone from a cask to a bottle. It has not been married with any other casks. This is a 10-year-old single cask Loch Lomond from a first fill bourbon barrel. This is bottled at 54.9% and this is absolutely wonderful. I mean, I've only had one brief nip out of it. I was supposed to sit down with it and have a few drams last night, but I got sidetracked. You know who you are. But this is another fine example. Now, the majority of single cask whiskies will be bottled up at their natural strength. Single cask whiskies are a fantastic way, again, to showcase just the raw product, what you are getting unadulterated straight from a cask. For me, there is so much excitement there. You've had the Glenallachie 10, you've had the Glenallachie 12, you've had the Glenallachie 15, but have you had it up at cask strength? There is so much more exploration to do when it comes to this, and for me, drinking at cask strength is a way to find kind of the true flavour of a whiskey, and then you can choose to water it down however you like. But anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you all very much for watching. If you've liked this video, please do drop a like down below and comment whether you've tried any cask strength whiskies and if you've got any particular favourites that maybe you prefer over their lower ABV counterparts. As always, if you'd like to support the channel, please do consider subscribing, and you can click the bell icon to be notified every time I upload a video. And on that note, I haven't poured a dram again, but why not start here? Slanjava.